The extraterrestrial leaders observed Earth's resistance as merely a minor one inconvenience in their eyes. The lighthouse of legendary strongholds was just another dogpole. They planned to use it for a backwater planet, plant it devoid of antiquated technology, and arm the planet. He mocked the disjointed defenses, reports of dispersed groups phoning vigilantes, dismissing themselves as desperate areas of disobedience, destined to fail the seasoned generals who conquered. Numerous systems perceived no danger in a species that had only just begun to explore the interstellar travel surface. But whispers among the resistance started to spread, known only as the mysterious Gunslinger. The person was credited with an impossible triumphs and audacious sabotage. Some people thought the stories were over the top, stories that increased morale, while others thought upon them as a form of annoyance that must be eliminated regardless. Of generals continued to trust without hesitation their superior technology and numbers to annihilate any resistance to their concept. Just one person might tip the insecurity bracket. The rise of Gunslinger was not characterized by magnificent proclamations or valiant speeches. They operated out of the shadows, mystery-cloaked identities of people who fought with them and expressed admiration for their accuracy and unwavering determination. Every mission carried out under their leadership. The strategic masterpiece was the guiding. They didn't waste lives or resources. Striking with strategic effectiveness, which left both friends and foes in unbelief in Earth's opposition. The Gunslinger became a symbol for fighters, of hope, a force capable of changing the course in their advantage. Extraterrestrial patrols started to find odd trends in their supply routes, or interrupted due to defeats. With precision, communication and surgery lines were cut, leaving the whole battalions were secluded and exposed. Resistance that was initially dispersed and reactive had become remarkably efficient. The generals began to see a trend among these disturbances, but declined to blame one on their shortcomings. Instead, they intensified their efforts on their disdain towards us, defenders.
Using more powerful forces to combat the threat of apparent resistance. But the Gunslinger didn't have enough brute force. Techniques that went against accepted warfare, they utilized the aliens' knowledge of the terrain, shortcomings, as well as an unwavering faith in themselves. Using uncertainty to their benefit, after missions, the extraterrestrial soldiers returned, discussing interactions that were almost myth. An adversary who appeared to expect their every action to strike with remarkable accuracy, prior to vanishing completely, according to the report, became more challenging for the generals to disregard, but their conceit continued. The Gunslinger was sacked, as a simple annoyance that refuses to acknowledge the potential for a real danger. Van Revel removed.
The appearance of the Gunslinger had an unquestionable effect on both parties' morale, sides for the resistance, and their activities demonstrated that triumph wasn't merely a cosmological experiment. In a faraway dream, Earth's defenders used to torment. The discouraged and cured started to band together, under a same objective for the foreign. The Gunslinger turned into a source of hope in the war. Soldiers hesitated out of fear and resentment. Place they used to charge without knowing what traps were waiting for them, and fear grew among. The ranks are weakening. The trust that had previously appeared unbreakable, in spite of the alien generals' increasing losses, clung to their conceit. Thinking with tremendous firepower and contraction in time, sophisticated technology would reduce the opposition to them on Earth. But the fact that the alien generals' increasing losses clung to their conceit had turned that instinct.
Enemies' antiquated weaponry, their strategies were spontaneous, and their numbers declining, yet they continued to flee. The extraterrestrial troops leveled every city for. They seized a dozen more leaders. In defiance, resistance cells proliferated. The opposition was an obstinate obstacle in the invaders' side, not because of their might, but because, to their stubbornness, to give up when the Gunslinger showed up with them provided more than just expertise. They provided clarity, without introducing themselves, or with fanfare. They examined the dispersed resistance's efforts and observed chances where others perceived disorder. They lacked authority to command, but led by action combatants who were
accustomed to competing egos and tactics that emerged unanticipatedly. Under the Gunslinger's vision, united missions that previously failed or retreat started to produce minor triumphs. However, successful supply raids had an influence. With accurate installations of KLN were carefully disassembled. It was as if Gunslinger was aware of the invaders in a manner that no other person could. In spite of their increasing dependence on the invaders, the resistance was cautious about Gunslinger. One was aware of their location or identity. Originated from efforts to find out more, were either silenced or diverted. The Gunslinger's attention was on the battle. Unwilling to engage in personal relationships or praise for some of this mystery breeds discomfort for others, which only made the practice more valuable for them. They have an air of invincibility about them. Regardless of their own sentiments, the opposition acknowledged the need for continued advances. Instead of obeying the Gunslinger's instructions, the aliens started to experience the pain of a coordinated supply lines for the opposition that had formerly extended unbroken across the world was cut off in crucial places that leave stranded extraterrestrial troops and undermanned recon forces assigned to with members of the hunting resistance discovered themselves surrounded by frightening regularity. Even their safest outposts were dangerous because they had bombs, and sabotage started to happen every day for them. Initially, following their arrival, the aliens had to deal with doubt that they weren't
used to a swiftly adapting adversary. It hit so forcefully that it set the daemons alight against their HP and one of their skills. It wasn't just their skill that set Gunslingers apart. However, the alien strategy depended on shattering resistance with overwhelming force. The Gunslinger's absolute power rebutted this with accuracy and creativity, avoiding brute force strength by their brute might. The overconfidence of the aliens against them, attracting them to traps and taking advantage of their combatants who use strict techniques, returned with the Gunslinger's companion tales of conflicts won with little. Each defeat dealt a blow to the alien war. They were symbolic. They were symbolic and purposeful. Humanity was reminded that the aliens
weren't unbeatable, and the opposition started to transition from defense to attack, encouraged by their successful combatants, who had been hesitant but now offered to missions with fresh vigor. They weren't merely led in by Gunslinger. Action, they changed the way the opposition. When considering the war, it wasn't only no longer about survival. Instead, it was about making every inch of the invaders pay. They allowed this change in perspective to spread, similar to a wildfire that inspires optimism in even the aliens' most dejected hearts. An uncoordinated gathering of people could pose. The Gunslinger poses no genuine threat to them. Was a fabrication of desperate people, a phantasm. People attempting to defend their ongoing disobedience by refusing to accept the opposition, in fact, only strengthen their losses before they become aware of it. The harm was real, and Gunslinger was already existing conflicts within the resistance. Wasn't completely eliminated, even due of their achievements, the Gunslingers. Although beneficial, the methods frequently clashed with the principles of the people they battled, along with a few members of the resistance questioned the ethics of some strategies, hesitant to use the same as brutal as their invaders. But Gunslinger thought there was no place for them. The stakes were too high to compromise, high for hesitation. Questioned this practicality approach caused divisions within the ranks. However, it also created a more angular, resolute resistance. Triumph was far from certain, but things had changed. The resistance stopped seeing themselves. Despite being doomed underdogs, they weren't simply defeated. They were battling to stay alive. To gain the influence of Gunslinger was their presence in AR. Rallying is indisputable landmark for the dispersed defenders of Earth. Every new defeat chipped away for the aliens, destroying their dominance and making them face the potential for failure. What had previously appeared to be a standard conquest, now in danger of developing into a lengthy war. The alien generals, encountered an expensive war. Instead of posing an organized threat, the assurance derived from generations of domination made them oblivious to the truth. Developing beneath their eyes, the gunslingers' actions started to cause. This certainty was assessed with care. Key activities were affected by strikes, leaving overwhelmed or trapped extraterrestrial forces, the increasing opposition using a combination of incredulity and contempt for creatures who had easily overthrew advanced civilizations. Ur's persistent disobedience was an obstacle. They are irritated rather than concerned. The idea that a broken species could present any significant difficulty was absurd. Claims of interference with their operations were written off as oddities, ascribed to good fortune or rudimentary guile. Strategic outposts ceased to speak, dismantled fortifications with unsettling accuracy. For the generals, these deficiencies they asked for no particular consideration. They sent reinforcements and carried on, considering the opposition to their plans would disintegrate with constant strain. However, when the disturbances increased, their disdainful demeanor started to wane. The extraterrestrial command structure, based on control and efficiency, were not ready. For the gunslingers' chaos zone, their inflexible strategies, so successful against traditional adversaries, became Beacon's supply chain's vulnerabilities for sweeping campaigns, were disassembled component by component to create obstacles that hindered their progress. Networks of communications, the foundation of a Korean. They coordinated in a methodical manner, targeted isolating divisions, and susceptible to what had been a seamless conquest, began to resemble a conflict of attrition, depleting morale and resources from even the most orderly soldiers. Fear started to spread among them. Once assured of their abilities, alien soldiers' superiority brought back from expeditions shaken, they mentioned an adversary that appeared out of nowhere, startling with precise accuracy, prior to disappearing. The reputation of the gunslinger, once discarded as a myth, turned into a disturbing reality. Aims to monitor and eradicate. This elusive person ultimately failed, further undermining the trust of the occupants. Every interaction, the invaders had exposed the holes in their tactics that allowed the without merg. Gunslinger took use of the general's increasing opposition, asked an awkward question. How could a less skilled adversary adjust so their conceit successfully preventing people from realizing the resistance was more than just getting by, was changing while the gunman was direction. Earth's defenders, possessed, changed into a force that controlled the people's minds with murderous impact. Every man, every detail, was forming a predicament, posing a threat to even the most sophisticated army generals, who are used to linear conflicts and probable resistance, battled to defeat an enemy that refused to follow their guidelines. Since, as resistance grew stronger, the alien lower hierarchy started to break up. Top commanders, who were annoyed with the absence of prompt action, raised concerns about the disagreements concerning their boss's knowledge strategy increased in frequency, producing rifts in the hitherto cohesive leadership. The general's refusal to accept their shortcomings intensified their attempts to dismantle the opposition. They deployed more patrols and stronger forces, and firmly grasped the occupied territory. But their actions only played into the hands of the gunslinger, exhausting their resources and making them vulnerable to more assaults. The strategies used by gunslingers weren't limited to causing harm. They were around, changing the terrain of combat by imposing the aliens to respond instead than prepare the resistance, determined the conditions of the combat. The aliens used to dictate the engagement. Experiencing the combat mindset creates the basics of the body armor and the mindset of the aliens used to dictate the engagement. In the course of the war, they discovered themselves on the defensive. Every battle, every act of reconstruction, chipped away at their aura of sabotage invincibility. Of what they had previously perceived as a straightforward campaign, evolved into a protracted dispute, when they were growingly unprepared to manage. Despite growing evidence that Kodaks, on the other hand, the generals held on to their faith in their unavoidable victory. They rejected the gunslinger as an exception, a single person whose acts during disruptive was unable to change the result of the conflict. They underestimated Earth's adaptability and resolve turned out to be their biggest flaw, is their hubris. They were blind to the bigger picture. The Gunslinger was more than just a combatant. They acted as a force that turned things around. Despair into rebellion and mayhem into strategy. There was a slight change in power. But the resistance is indisputable, once reactive and dispersed, working with fighters with newly acquired self-confidence who had hitherto depended on improvisation and luck, now carried out missions precisely, and reason for the Gunslinger's impact went beyond their inspiring deeds, encouraging others to think that it is possible for each and every alien soldier to win. A dozen of them made me uneasy. Members of the opposition found strength in their illustration of the harmony between fear and one's hope was firmly in the aliens' favor. Tilted toward Earth, the extraterrestrial generals whose conceit has blinded them was unable to comprehend the scope of what they encountered. Opposition remained a hindrance and an annoyance. Crushed, instead of becoming an adversary, acknowledged their incapacity to AP appropriately, left to see past their own supremacy, making them susceptible to an adversary they had once judged. The Gunslinger's alteration was minor. The generals and the game's rules were only starting to comprehend how. Sadly, their pride was misguided and would not only cost them wins, it would jeopardize the campaign's very foundation. The origins of the Gunslinger were mysterious. Enmeshed in conjecture, nobody in the resistance might explain their origins, whence or how they obtained their unmatched abilities. Some whispered that they were a rogue ex-soldier, an agent who had abandoned the ancient methods used by humanity to defend its survival. Others thought they were capable of, indicated a closer relationship with the aliens themselves. A defector, perhaps, a result of covert research. Whatever the Gunslinger, provided no truth, justifications, and opposition. Desperate to win, they were aware that to emphasize the unique qualities of the Gunslinger wasn't only their unparalleled accuracy or strategic gen, but their unwavering intuition. They worked with a purpose and a focus that almost seemed obsessive. Every choice and every deed were a part of a bigger scheme that only they know about. Moral sense, though, wasn't always in line with the principles of the opposition as Earth's combatants grappled with the moral implications of their terrorism. The Gunslinger observed just the need of the battle for them. Human survival exceeded any personal interest, as well as this clarity caused them to choose others. Wouldn't their tactics and weaponry be another intriguing aspect? In contrast to the most, resistance groups employ homemade tools. The Gunslinger's arsenal of fighters was a fusion of alien technology with Earth's inventiveness. The weapons and technologies they carried were more than the resistance had ever seen prior to Sleek's effective and destructive exact qualities. Each piece of equipment appeared created to be as effective as possible, posing queries regarding how they had acquired such instruments. The resistance made endless conjectures, but no people cried out to them. The IG without fail, Gunslinger supplied them. Vulnerability of those who battled with pluralism occasionally saw glimpses of momentary hesitancy in which the state oppressor, pursued by guilt, tried to slow the rebellion. Although few, these instances of facade cracking indicated the Gunslingers. The reasons weren't as aloof as they seemed. It seemed that humanity wasn't the only one. They were engaged in combat over something more intimate and connected to the past. They declined to join the resistance. Although appreciative of the successes, the delivery of Gunslinger was not without its limitations. Some leaders have misgivings about their readiness to work outside the agreed-upon limits for the battle. Although it was reduced, collateral damage was not invariably preventable, and the destruction and deaths of those killed made the matter more difficult. With their supporters' values in mind, these simmering beneath the surface were tensions, causing conflict, and the Gunslinger never recognized nor made an effort to resolution. They concentrated only on the battle, letting others deal with the moral ramifications of their behavior. The aliens also started to notice the presence. A critical study found that important people in Walworth could trace battles within the contained vault. Reports of the Gunslinger's unusual tactics of lost battles and important missions, Disturbed contained accounts of a person who went against all expectations, anticipating their capacity to merge. Utilizing alien technology with human ingenuity implied familiarity with the invaders. That was much more than what the opposition ought to have had. Foreign generals who had written off the opposition as an irritation now viewed the gunslinger as a wild card, an unidentified characteristic that disregarded their computations made to counteract this threat. Became more violent, but the gunslinger never stopped being elusive, stepped forward in spite of their tendency to be lonesome. The gunslinger engendered devotion among individuals who joined them in their resistance. Combatants described their unwavering bravery, their capacity to remain composed amid strain, and their reluctance to give up. Against the odds, these characteristics, along with their indisputable presence and ability to act in support, they became a symbol of rebellion as a result. Against overwhelming odds for many, the gunslinger stood for not just optimism, but obscenity. The invader might be surpassed by. The secret lies in ingenuity and determination. The area around the gunslingers stretched even farther. To there, the reasons behind their fight with such unwavering vigor that some believed that vengeance was a personal goal. Loss incurred by others during the invasion felt that remorse was what motivated them, a debt they might never be able to pay back. Regardless of the motivation for their behavior, indicated a single goal that overshadowed anyone's worries. This focus turned each person become a force, to be taken seriously, but also mysterious. Few people had the courage to comprehend the guns. The singer's behavior went beyond just defeating the invaders from space. They were about changing the definition of resistance itself. Earth's fighters were influenced by them, started to stop viewing themselves as victims, but as equals in combat, their strategies becoming more sophisticated and their morale stronger, their determination unwavering, even as the real identity of the gunslinger and motives and their effects were kept secret. On the opposition was indisputable. They were a force, not just a combatant, of changing the conflict in methods that were not entirely comprehended by either party. The foreign generals encountering opposition that refused to shatter made a strategic decision to choose their most terrible weapon that wasn't intended to just to put a stop to the conflict, but to send a clear indication to any world that might be willing to oppose the tactic, was clearly get rid of the rest. Fortresses destroy morality and don't leave any uncertainty regarding the pointlessness of defiance. They misjudged the determination of the one. Last time, Gunslinger and the Resistance, as the extraterrestrial powers came together, the Resistance had to make a tough decision. Retrench and run the danger of losing everything else, stand up and resist overwhelming odds. That the Gunslinger consistently provided no inspiring remarks or assurances of specific possibilities. Instead, their deeds spoke for them. They assumed command more loudly than any words could. Of the circumstance with uncompromising clarity organizing the opposition into a mention. For the first time, one cohesive force, each and every warrior, resource, and every bit of strength was applied to survival as the ultimate goal. The confrontation was not like anything the Resistance or aliens had encountered. The Gunslinger's tactics took use of the enemy haughtiness, compelling them to postures that rendered their technological edge over the opposition, battled with a resolve that came from hope and desperation, taking advantage of every vulnerability and adjusting to any change in the combat alien troops are certain of. They discovered their superiority, countered the Gunslinger's every move. Presence was sensed in each action they strategies that introduced turmoil into the enemy's rankings, and reversing the trend where failure had appeared to be certain for the extraterrestrial generals. The conflict turned into a reckoning. Their failure to recognize Earth's defenders' faith in the unavoidable domination and their unwillingness to change resulted in an expensive string of, due to his shortcomings, the Gunslinger was no longer a phage. They were a force, a myth, or an exception that went against the fundamental ideas of the empire the invaders had established, was With all of their authority, generals were constrained to carefully responding to their well-thought-out ideas, falling apart against the unwavering opposition. Victory arrived at the resistance's price came out bruised. Their numbers declined, and their resources that are almost depleted. Yet, for the first time since the start of the assault, the extraterrestrial troops stood victorious. A relentless juggernaut were broken, compelled to withdraw and leave. The Gunslinger's plans for Earth faithful to form vanished into the aftermath without fanfare or justification, abandoning the opposition. To assert their difficult won, the influence of Triumph the Gunslinger stretched much beyond the battlefield. They had changed the definition of the resistance. Thought might be dispersing hope into a unified, powerful force, that allies had been defeated by more than just talent or resolve, but by declining to acknowledge that defeat is inevitable. In the invader's retreat, left behind a single world's actions, rocked the humble empire. Resistance and defiance started the lengthy procedure for restoring drawing strength. From their mutual accounts of victory in the Gunslinger become a spreading legend throughout what's left of humanity, like Christ. For many, wildfires were a representation of the tenacity of Earth and a reminder of what bravery could accomplish. And inventiveness for others, they continued to mystery, of a character whose intentions, and we may never fully understand origins, can easily be interpreted as a gift from the gods of Earth. The Gunslinger was ultimately more than a commander or a combatant. They were a part of an evidence of the strength of a single decided person to alter the trajectory of history. But their presence was while their legacy remained imprinted into the thoughts and emotions of individuals who had accompanied them in combat. The extraterrestrial one painful lesson had been taught to the generals. They would persist into all futures. Encounter by underestimating the expense of Earth. They are very important to them, and Gunslinger had made certain that Rakhal would never forget.